Thank you. Very interesting. And Bart, if I can take you in, I'm just being told I'm out of time, but I do want to hear your thoughts on the subject. So if I can finally bring you in.
Yeah, and I will be then very quick. I share a lot of what's been said. I think, like Anna, I'm a bit more concerned about scarring because it's really the K-shaped recovery, the fact that some pockets in society will be doing fine after the crisis and some won't. We talked extensively about people. The other thing I want to underline is the difference between firms. I mentioned this long tail before. I particularly worry about firms that were not doing very well on digital transformation before the pandemic, were perhaps challenged to get it done during the pandemic and may therefore fall even further behind after the pandemic. So I do worry a lot about firms, and that really leads to the point that I think anything that can be done from a government perspective to support, to improve what we sometimes call absorptive capacity, which is the ability of firms to drive new technologies, to innovate, to retrain skills, is going to be very important. The other thing on the K-shaped recovery I would mention, in addition to people and firms, is regions and place effects. So I think we worry about the fact that the persistence of regional disparities will be exacerbated by the crisis, that we will have these pockets where social infrastructure has been hurt even more because the NHS has been under pressure, because schools have had a larger number of pupils that have been dropping out and not being able to catch up. So all these things that are explaining this sort of weak social infrastructure that many regions in the country have that are underperforming could even be exacerbated. And that would really therefore be pointing in the direction that, again, a lot of emphasis on education and on training and in investing in catching up kids in schools, but also improve intermediate skills of the workforce, for example, are important government priorities to avoid these scarring effects as they emerge after the crisis.
Thank you. Very interesting. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Felicity. Go to Anthony, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. And first of all, I'm going to give Giles a chance to answer that question because I think he was waiting down. Very quickly, what are the what's the one policy you'd introduce if you're a Chancellor or business secretary to improve increase productivity?
I must admit I was biased because as a special advisor I was lobbied on the idea that Anna referred to there, and I thought it was a really impressive one and thought it was worth a go. But I do think the most important policy is probably macroeconomic, which I understand might be on the agenda later, that keeping the macroeconomy growing strongly, even at the risk of an inflationary outbreak, I think is more important than we might have realized 10 years ago. And that it's a rising tide oils the economy beautifully. And so biasing on that side stops people getting stuck in their position, stops businesses failing to be able to float off the rocks of debt. So if it was, I could be that grandiose, it would be a more expansive macroeconomic approach. But otherwise, I'd put in a second vote for Anna's idea.
Right. Okay. That's great. Sort of consensus there. Thank you. My questions are about the impact of the pandemic on productivity, and then also on more on technology and technological diffusion. We've touched on the pandemic in terms of scarring, but my questions are really on how it's changed working practices, working from home, obviously, and then also the fact we can all do this video conferencing here. And lots of people have worked out how actually it does make us a lot more efficient. And I was thinking of our witnesses here, that you're just spending a couple of hours on a Zoom call with us, whereas before you'd have to have travelled into Parliament and then travel back home, and it would have taken 4 hours rather than 2 hours. So maybe we've doubled your personal productivity this afternoon using Zoom. But really sort of range of views. I'll come to Bart van Ark first. What do you think has been the impact of the pandemic on productivity? And do you think it's a one-off, or will it be lasting because we've all learned how to do things in new ways?
So I think to answer this question, we need to look back again a little bit at the pre-pandemic period, because we already saw in the pre-pandemic period that we saw some companies doing quite well in terms of new technologies and new technology adoption. That was not so much sector focused, it was really much across the economy in services sectors as well as in manufacturing sectors of the economy. These new technologies, in particular, sort of the latest vintage of digital technology, mobile, data analytics, the move to robotics and artificial intelligence, it's actually quite a complicated technology for companies to integrate into their business models. So it tends to be larger companies that have been able to invest significantly in the discussion that we had a little earlier about investment in intangibles, so investment in organizational capital and management capabilities and in reskilling the workforce, who were able to advance most quickly on their journey, whereas companies that were not able to do it didn't have the funding, didn't have the skills, or the management competencies to do that fell behind. So that's the way they entered this COVID-19 crisis. And I think originally when we entered the crisis, we thought everyone would be in trouble, but we actually then found out that actually these differences got actually exacerbated. Companies that were already on their journey with regard to digital transformation were even doing better. They were able to just very quickly, they sent their people working from home, they had the systems in place very quickly. Whereas companies that hadn't really been quite used to it sent their people home and had to find out how to work with them and had to sort of reinvent their working methods and their models. So I think what we're seeing now is that that difference has increased. Now, some companies have managed to catch up, and that's good news. Some companies, forced by the crisis, were able to step up and made some progress. So I think there's a certain element of convergence taking place here, of catch up, of firms that are falling behind. But a lot of firms are not, and that really raises the question: what happens after the pandemic, right? So once we are now, winding down these programs, are we going to lose those companies that have not been very successful in this transition, and therefore opening up the space for the more productive and the more digitally advanced companies to progress? So a key policy question here is whether we can design the winding down of the support program in such a way that we're not losing the most productive companies, which we may lose simply because they have liquidity problems, not necessarily productivity problems. But at the same time that we don't leave companies in place that ultimately are not going to survive without that help. That's a very critical question. And again, I do believe, as I mentioned earlier, that support programs, investment programs for firms to really invest in that absorptive capacity are going to be the test to see whether companies are going to be successful in this or not.
Thank you.